Thank you for joining us. We are currently playing our pre-event slideshow. Blue text on a white background. Welcome, the program will begin shortly. This slide and slides following feature the Schomburg Center Literary Festival branding in the upper right corner, with white text in a dark blue bubble with 3 peach-colored droplets overlaid. There is a digital collage image of a Black man on the left, pictured from the chest up, with different shades of brown making up his skin, wearing a patchwork shirt of varying blue patterns, and a bird's eye image of a street with 2 cars on it, one white and one yellow, cutting diagonally across his chest.
Welcome to the second annual Schomburg Center Literary Festival. I'm Novella Ford, Associate Director of Public Programs and Exhibition at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, where we are celebrating 95 years as one of the world's leading cultural institutions devoted to the research, preservation, and exhibition of materials focused on global Black experiences. While our doors remain closed, we have migrated online where you can access parts of our archival collections and enjoy programs like our Literary Festival. I'll be turning over today's exploration of YA literature, children's books, and Black comic books to my colleague, Katie Atu Tubman, Manager of Education Programs and Outreach, including our renowned Junior Scholars Program. Just a heads up, Katie Atu will be in conversation on Saturday at 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Patrice Cullors, one of the 3 founders of Black Lives Matter. But first, let me say thank you for tuning in all this week, and I hope you plan to be with us on Saturday, possibly between 10:30 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. Eastern Standard. You can visit our festival website at schomburgcenterlitfest.org and make sure you shop the fest by ordering online at our Schomburg shop. Kicking off YA is Lit is award-winning author Jacqueline Woodson. Jacqueline has been a friend to the Schomburg, lending her enthusiasm for Black writers and keen insight on reaching young people through literature. She's always one of the first people to say yes, including in 2017, participating in what will become a 6-hour masterclass on the writings of James Baldwin, the first of what became our But Then I Read series. So I will always be grateful for your time, Jacqueline, and your intellectual generosity. With that said, I'm looking forward to the conversation, and I'll turn it over to you, Katie Atu.
Thank you so much, Novella. And welcome everyone. Again, my name is Katie Atu Tubman, and I am your MC for today. I'm so excited. We have an incredible day of programming in store for you. So just welcome to the Schomburg Center Literary Festival, YA is Lit. This festival continues to expand the Schomburg's long tradition of championing authors of African descent from across the globe and publications that celebrate Black history. So I want you to be sure to follow the schedule for this week for all we have in store for you. Please follow at schomburgcenterlitfest.org and stay engaged. I can't stress that enough. Like I said, we're going to have an incredible day of programming specifically for youth audiences or anyone interested in learning more about authors of African descent who have spoken to the lives and experiences of young people. So we want you to stay engaged. We want you to use the chat to submit your questions and comments. I take flattery and praises, but also the authors should get that praise too as well. We want you to keep them brief as well and PG, please. At this time, we'll also do our best to get to as many of your questions as possible, but do remember that after our programs, we do host a Q&A session for you to have your answers for questions you posted in the chat. Lastly, I want to mention, we are recording the program for archive. I mean, with the Schomburg Center, what are we without archiving? But you, the audience, will not be a part of that recording. Please be mindful of your fellow audience members in the chat, and we thank you for tuning in. I have the honor and privilege of welcoming one of my favorite, all-time favorite authors, someone who inspired me to go into education and to be concerned with what Black and Brown children are reading and how they see themselves in the world. Jacqueline Woodson is an award-winning author and the most recent recipient of the 2020 Hans Christian Andersen Award. Her New York Times bestselling memoir, Brown Girl Dreaming, won the National Book Award, as well as this Coretta Scott King Award, a Newbery Honor, and the NAACP Image Award. She also wrote the adult books Red at the Bone, a New York Times bestseller, and Another Brooklyn, a 2016 National Book Award finalist. Her dozens of books for young readers include New York Times bestseller Harbor Me, Newbery Honor winners Feathers, Showway, and After Tupac and D. Foster, as well as the picture book Each Kindness and The Day You Begin, with both books winning the James Adams Children's Book Awards. These are just a slew of amazing honoraries that have been given to an incredible author and writer and someone who is a champion of young adult books, and especially by authors of color. I cannot continue I can be here for hours. We'll be here for days if I go on how incredible Jacqueline Woodson is. So I want to welcome Jacqueline Woodson. Jacqueline will be kicking us off with a reading, and we'll be in conversation with the one and only Levar Burton. Rainbow. Okay, we won't go there. But please join me in welcoming Jacqueline Woodson.
Oh, thanks so much, Katie, for that fabulous introduction, and for all you all are doing at the Schomburg. Thanks, Novella and Khalila, for everything. And I'm so excited to be in conversation with Mr. Levar Burton. So I'm going to start by reading 3 poems from Before the Ever After, which is the book we're going to talk about in the first half of this show. This is called Ollie. Ollie says he doesn't really remember the beginning of his story. Says he's glad about that. It was a tragedy, he says. And when things like that happen, your mind blanks out. It's like your mind knows, he says, how to take care of itself. Before he was one of my best friends, he was a baby with green eyes and a bright red afro, left outside a Texas church in a blanket with a note pinned to his blanket. Please take care of this baby and love him like crazy too. He used to take the note out of his pocket all the time. Now he keeps it stored away in a plastic bag, the paper inside yellowish and ripped on one corner. Too delicate, Ollie says, to show anybody anymore. We all know what came next in the story, Ollie says. He can't remember. A preacher and his wife found and kept him. Loved Ollie just like the note asked them to do. Then the preacher died, and it was only his wife, Bernadette, who's Ollie's mom. Bernadette, who comes over sometimes to drink coffee with my own mama, and sometimes, if it's a Friday night, 1 glass of wine. Any more than that, Bernadette says, and I forget my own name. Even though she said that 100 times, she and mama laugh anyway. Ollie looks at my dad sometimes with those bright green eyes, like he's deep in a dream of remembering his own father living. Ollie, my dad used to call my son from another father and mother, who always made Ollie duck his head. Which always made Ollie duck his head to hide how red his face got, to hide how big his smile got. Ollie says he doesn't really remember the story of being a baby in a basket, but sometimes the story lives inside his eyes when kids ask, "What are you? You black or white or Spanish or mixed?" And Ollie has to shrug and say, maybe I'm all of those things, and maybe I'm something else too. Once when Ollie told my dad about kids always asking him this, my dad just gave Ollie a fist bump and said, "You know what you are, Ollie? You're 100% you." This is called On My Daddy's Shoulders. I was on my daddy's shoulders when crowds gathered around us, pushing autograph books, t-shirts, and scraps of paper into his hands. I was on my daddy's shoulders when a band marched through Maplewood, playing a song someone wrote about the speed in his step and the power in his hands. I was on my daddy's shoulders when the TV ran their interviews with him recounting the plays of the Super Bowl game, when the guy on the other team let the ball fly right through his hands. I was on my daddy's shoulders when the crowd grew smaller and the coach said, "Maybe next game, you need some rest." Then looked up at me and smiled, trying not to stare too hard at my daddy's shaking hands. And this last one is called New Normal. Monday morning, I come down all dressed in jeans, a football jersey, and a t-shirt underneath to find Mama kneeling in front of Daddy, pulling his socks onto his feet, and him staring out the window. "Already hasn't been a great morning," Mama says. "Zachariah, say good morning to your son," she tells my dad. But he keeps looking straight ahead, his brow creased, like he's deep in concentration. Hey, Dad, I say anyway, come over to him, kiss the top of his head. He jumps a little, but keeps on staring. And now Mama's at the stove, spooning oatmeal into a bowl for me, sprinkling nuts on top and slicing banana over it. I can do that, I tell her. But you don't have to, Mama says back. Not yet. Be a boy for a little while longer. I look over at my dad again, his head hanging now and moving slowly from side to side. This isn't some kind of new normal, my mom says. We're gonna get through this. We're gonna get this figured out, CJ. She pushes the bowl of oatmeal toward me. What time is it? My dad says. I gotta get to my game. You have time, my mom says back to him. You have plenty of time. And now I'm so excited to invite Mr. Levar Burton to the screen so we can chat about before the ever after and lots of other stuff. Hey.
Hey.
How are you?
Oh, I'm so well. It is really good to see you. I love you. From the very first moment we met, there was an instant sense of kinship, in the sense that there's something about the dynamic that I have with you that speaks to belonging. And I treasure that about my relationship with you. But tell us about this novel, because it's always a cause for celebration when there's new Jacqueline Woodson work in the world, right?
Right.
So tell us about Before the Ever After, its origins, and what was the impetus for these characters and this particular story.
Oh, thanks, Levar. And thanks again. I love you so much. So you know that the decades and decades of love back into the ancestral world. So happy to be here with you. So Before the Ever After is a story of a boy whose dad gets CTE. He's a professional football player, and he gets chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is the brain damage that comes from too much impact. But he gets it in the early 90s before it was known that that was what was happening to football players. And it's CJ, Zachariah Jr.'s story of what happens to his father, but it's also a love song to his dad. It's the story of their relationship and what it means to be a father and son, and what it means to have a community, and what it means to have that community hold you up when you feel like the world is crumbling, which is very, I think, meaningful right now, of course, right? Mm-hmm. The importance of communities in our lives.
Right. There is this incredibly beautiful relationship between these two. Having grown up without a father in the house, it is, and I know that my story isn't unusual. How important was it for you to portray this dynamic of this loving father and son?
It was very important. I didn't meet my own dad until I was 14. He and my mom separated when I was 2 months old, and then they got back together when I was 14, which I do not recommend. But I think that there is that narrative in the world that Black fathers are absent, which is not always true. I mean, I think every circumstance is very different. And I wanted to write against that narrative. And I also wanted to show that this is what it looks like when fathers do stay. And there are many who do stay. And this is the importance of that relationship in a child's life. So I think we can obviously grow up whole and fulfilled and thoughtful and responsible and great parents in various family makeups. And in this book, I wanted to show what it looked like in terms of that family makeup, where there is the mom, the dad, and the son.
Are you a football fan?
I was for many years. My mom never let my brothers play football. Like very, very early on, she was like, "I'm not going to let you destroy your bodies that way." And we were like, "What? What are you talking about? Everyone we know is, buff and beautiful." And I mean, I grew up in the days of OJ and people like that playing, Joe Namath, And I love the game. I love the beauty of the game. I love the determination and of the athletes. I loved the way people moved. It was like this dance, and then I really began to interrogate it, and it was a game that broke my heart. It was a game where I saw the trading of Black and brown bodies. I saw the destruction of Black and brown bodies. I saw what happened, you know, the racism that came with people trying to stand up for what they deeply believed in. And yeah, I would say it definitely broke my heart. But I think one of the most heartbreaking things about it was what happened with CTE, and the fact that doctors didn't tell the truth about it. Football, you know, people who own football players basically didn't tell the truth about it. We knew that there was trauma happening, and it wasn't talked about.
Yeah, like you, the NFL lost me when they ostracized Colin Kaepernick, and I was a longtime football fan. Played football as a kid in both Pop Warner and in high school, and there's always been this sort of tense relationship between the NFL owners and the Players Association. I mean, that's well documented. But on this specific issue of CTE, it just seemed to me specifically onerous in that they knew the research, they knew what effect this was having on the brains of these really healthy, ideal physical specimens. And I think that you talking about that in this book is really brave, really bold. Did you feel exposed or at risk at all in telling this story?
I think the case, like with so many of my books, I know there's going to be pushback. I know there's going to have to be explaining and conversations. And that's also the beauty of writing, right? It begins a conversation. So I think that, especially for me, writing young people's literature, it can begin a dialogue with people who are just beginning to think about this stuff. And for me, it's like, I tell the truth or I tell nothing at all, right? What is there to lose in truth telling? So whatever will be, but for me, I wanted to write a good story that told the truth and introduced the world to characters that they loved. I mean, I was thinking about this yesterday with If You Come Softly, which was a book about a boy who was killed in a case of police brutality in the 90s. I wrote that book. And I remember people saying it was sensationalized that wasn't happening because there was no social media, and a lot of people didn't know that it was happening inside Black and brown communities. And I'm like, I know the truth. I know what's going on. And now people would probably say I was ripping it from the headlines, right? So it's going to be interesting to see what happens to Before the Ever After later on.
Well, let's talk about some of the characters, the Fantastic Four, ZJ's, his boys.
Boys, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about them and what the origin of this group, this cadre of young men. Where do they come from in your mind and your imagination?
So Ali, who I read a piece about, he's the one who sees CJ's dad as a father figure as well, but they all do in some way, shape, and form. And then there's Daniel, who's this kind of daredevil of a kid on a bicycle, and Dari. And so these are the friends that he forms very young, who we know they'll be friends forever. And I really wanted to I wanted to draw up these boys, because one thing about writing, as you know, when you're writing, you get to live inside these worlds and really grow to love these characters, and they make you laugh and they do unexpected stuff. And so I really wanted to live in the world of these 4, 11, 12-year-old boys, to just see where they took me and how they made me laugh. And of course, I have a 12-year-old son who was like, "Mommy, don't put me in your book." I'm like, "Don't worry. I got my own boys living in my head that are entertaining me." But I really wanted to build for ZJ a community as part of the hope in the story, because I think that's the truth. And we're seeing it now as we move through these pandemic revolutionary days, that, some days chicken, some day bone, right? We wake up and there's something really good happening, and then there's something really devastating when we look at what happened with the Breonna Taylor verdict yesterday. There, you know, you wake up and it's you get the news and you're like, how do I move on and make the world better and continue to try to do my work to change it, knowing this devastation lives side by side with this beauty. So here is CJ losing his dad, you know, his dad's mind slowly going, and at the same time he has these three really good friends who will be by his side and continue to walk with him. And even at the very end, you see them walking together, kind of out of the narrative, right? And you know that they will continue to be together and support each other.
You have said about the writing of this novel that it was for you in many ways an exploration of those that we lose in our lives. Talk about a little of the loss that you have experienced that went into this particular piece of writing for you.
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean, I think of I was raised by my mom and grandma, who are both ancestors now. I lost my mom suddenly when she was 68. I think about, you know, even as a young person, the friends who died. I grew up, I came of age during the AIDS epidemic, and so many of our artist friends we lost during that period of time. And now we look at the 200,000 plus people that we've lost with this pandemic. And I think of other ways that people have been lost to drugs, to even the dementia and Alzheimer's, and the way that people who you once were able to connect to, you can't connect to anymore. And so I definitely did my own memories of loss to begin to tell Zachariah 44's story, the dad's story, and then my own human resilience to tell ZJ's story.
For the record and for the writers in the room, is there a difference between writing girl characters, as you do so brilliantly, and boy characters?
It's a different part of the brain for me in terms of thinking about, gender as a binary. I think that there is all of this intersectionality. And maybe that's because, I identify as female and I write these characters who are, cis male, cis female. I think there's a lot of overlap, but when I'm writing boy characters, I always start with who's the boy I'd like to be friends with? Who's the son I'd like to have? Who is the character I'd like to watch grow old in some way? And really start thinking about starting from someone I like. And that helps me get them on the page. Whereas when I'm writing girl characters, I write remembering the girl I was. So it is different in that way, that I go inside my own history for girl characters, and to some extent boys too. Like I was a huge athlete, so I can talk junk about basketball till I'm blue in the face, and so I can give that to my characters who are basketball players, boys and girls, but mainly I have my boy characters speaking a lot and saying and being sensitive. And I don't know if that's because I'm writing from this perspective or if that's how I want men and boys to be in the world. You write into the world what you want to be there.
Absolutely. Maybe a little bit of both, right?
Mm-hmm.
Music and poetry play very heavily in this narrative. And as the writer, you are writing poems for the characters. How difficult is that to choose these different voices to express through and then create for them as the singular voice expressing the entire narrative?
It takes a lot of rewriting. It was funny. I was talking to this guy Johnny the other day, and he asked, were you waiting 40 years to use the Sugar Hill Gang song in a book? It's in this book, and I think the music just stays in my head. Once it gets in there, it's in my head for the rest of my life. And I always listen to music when I'm writing, so I'll play a soundtrack from the 90s and the early 2000s if that's the period that I'm writing in. But yeah, it takes a lot to figure out where the music lands inside the book, at the same time trying to figure out the musicality of the narrative. But music is, I think, of course, I make in this book, ZJ's a musician, the main character's a musician, but yeah, they kind of also live side by side. The music in my head, the music in the book, the musicality of the language I'm writing.
Absolutely. And finally, for me, what is the message that you would like for your reading audience to get? Is there a single message, or is it more complex than that for you in terms of what you would like the audience to receive from this book?
So I think from this book, like so many of my books, it's about hope, and it's about loving fiercely today, right? Because tomorrow's not promised. We don't know what's coming. And it's really important. Like CJ is so present. He's so in his dad's life. He's so vocal about his love for his dad. And I think that's really, that it's not like I'm trying to teach us that, because I always say I don't write to teach, I write because I want to learn something myself. And I think that's what I learned in writing Before the Ever After, that I want people who I love to know I love them before it's too late. And I want, I want young readers to know that it's okay to be sensitive and to love and to feel hope, and to, sometimes get your heart broken, but know that it's going to be okay. So I guess that's the message. It's going to be okay. You got to get out of here.
I do, but before I go, I just want to say that your writing for me has always been about the hope in this world. And even though, like, yesterday was such a difficult day for me.
No, you froze. Oh no.
For me,
Oh.
with the Breonna Taylor case, the idea of seeing you face to face this morning was a breath of air that I genuinely needed, because you are, Jackie, all about the hope for humanity.
Oh, thank you. And so are you. I adore you, Levar.
I adore you
Thank
too. I love you.
I
I
love
wish
you.
I could
Stay
stay,
safe.
but I've got to go back to the thing I was doing before I came over here to do this thing. Have a great day, you all. The Schomburg is a one-of-a-kind institution on this planet. It is a treasure for us all to enjoy. Peace and blessings. Have a wonderful afternoon, y'all.
Take care. I'm so psyched for the thing you're doing. So go do it.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Well, hi there.
Hey.
I never get to be, or rarely am I on this side of this. So I'm excited to be able to chat with you in the second half about a book that came out last year that is now in paperback. But first, I wanted to read to you a comment that was in the chat. And it said, "Our family, including 9-year-old twin fourth graders, sends lots of love, lots of appreciation and light. Fourth grade classes at their school are reading your books, Miss Woodson, including Brown Girl Dreaming."
Yay, that's awesome. Thank you.
So this is what you are giving us. This is what you're giving our schools. And I'm sure that I speak for a lot of educators as well as parents out there, that they are grateful for the work that you are doing. With that said, I didn't realize you've been publishing for basically 30 years or a little bit more than that.
Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy. So you're prolific in your writing. How have you changed from book to book? And has your approach or style changed over the years?
I think my writing's gotten better since the early books. I mean, I always say people shouldn't read me backwards. They should read me forward, because they might say, oh, that writing got raggedy. So I've learned a lot. I think I've learned a lot about trusting myself as a writer, and about not having to overstate, obviously, and about character development. I feel like one thing I've gained is a faith in knowing, Jackie, you can tell a story. You've done it before, you can do it again. So that makes me less fearful of going into a book. And I think early on, I was a little more scared.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot that young writers or up and coming writers can learn from you. What's your relationship to sort of mentoring writers who are coming up?
I think, I get asked a lot about my own role as mentor. And I believe heavily in mentor text, using the books to learn the format, because it's how I learned to write. I learned to write by reading and rereading, you know, James Baldwin and Toni Morrison and even Raymond Carver, like these writers who were really teaching me how to put story on page, and that there are no shortcuts, right? Talking to another writer is not necessarily going to get you there faster than you studying the text. You kind of need both of those things. But, and so as a young person, that those were definitely the mentors for me. And I think now that I'm older, and the kind of auntie writing, I still believe in the old school way of doing it.
So let's talk about Read at the Bone. I'm holding my advanced reader copy.
Oh, we got to get to the real thing.
I had the real thing, but I could not. I think it's in my office. And so here we are at home, where I take all the paperback versions, which are easier for me to like get through. But in addition to writing for young people, you have also written 2 novels for adults. So Read at the Bone has come out in paperback earlier this month, right? Earlier this month. So can you talk a little bit about writing literature for adults and how it compares to writing for young people?
Well, one thing that I think that happens with writing for adults is you have the adult perspective that you don't think they won't understand this, right? When I'm writing for young people who haven't had the experiences yet, I don't do super explaining, but I don't assume they know what I'm talking about. So there's much more of an immediacy to the writing. Whereas when I'm writing with adults, I imply more. So it is more implicit, and I expect the adults to meet me halfway in the narrative. So when you have a relationship like Melody and Iris's, the people reading it have probably experienced a mother-daughter relationship or a daughter-mother relationship, and they're bringing that experience to the narrative and their judgment of the narrative. I think of young people as they don't judge, which is why I love writing for and with them. So, but yeah, that's one of the things. I feel like the canvas is much wider and allows me to do some more experimentation on it as well.
Could you see either of your adult books being turned into a film or a television show or something like that?
I just finished a screenplay for Read at the Bone yesterday.
Did you?
Yeah, I did.
Congratulations.
I am so happy. I am so happy to be done.
Yeah. Oh, congratulations. So more to come, more things to invite you back for.
Yes. We're going out to look for directors next. So.
Oh, you heard it here first.
Yes. Yeah, I'm doing it with Lena Waite's company with Hillman Grad.
Okay.
So keeping it Black.
Yeah, right on. So hallmark of your fiction is your ability to give voice to the unnoticed and tell unrepresented stories. Can you speak a little to this in your storytelling, as well as how you nurture and support, as we already talked about, other aspiring writers, but just in general, even nurturing those characters that you have in your books?
I just think it came from this place of audacity. It's like, how dare us not be represented in the literature and in the world and in every single moment. And so I never thought of doing it any other way. I remember when I was very young, I wrote a story about a white family that won the lotto and moved to Long Island or something. It was such a weak story. And I wrote it because I thought so many of the books I read were white folks, and I thought, this is how you get a book published. You have to write about white people. And, you know, it was weak and dumb. And I was in a writing class at the New School, and I had a teacher who was like, you know, this is dumb, basically. And then I was also working on Last Summer with Mason, which I thought wouldn't get published because it was about Black people in Bushwick, you know, in the 80s or 70s or whenever. But from that point on, I just wanted to write the truth. Like I had no interest in writing about stuff and people I didn't care about, and the people I, you know, love and care about and grew up with and know and surround myself with are predominantly Black and brown people. And they're our stories need to be out in the world. So that's what I think.
Yeah, it sounds like for you, you use literature as also your form of activism in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a deep sense of right and wrong and social justice and representation and non-erasure and responsibility. I mean, I believe all writers have a responsibility to reflect the world in a way that makes sense and doesn't hurt anybody, you know? So I think it would be hurtful to not represent the people I love on the page. I think it's in the same way, I think it's hurtful to represent them as stereotypes, right? Or to make those stereotypes more profound by rewriting them and rewriting them.
Right.
Reinforcing.
Is there any genre of book writing that you would like to have a hand at?
That I haven't done already.
That you haven't done already.
I'm intrigued by science fiction, but the only science fiction I've really read is Octavia Butler, which I don't know, is it really considered that? And so I think about wanting to understand creating worlds like that. I mean, I know there are people doing it really well in present day, but I would have to read more because I don't want to write something I don't understand.
Yeah. So to close out, going back to Red at the Bone, what's the story that you want people to walk away from this book with?
The history of the destruction of Black wealth is one of the huge themes in the book. The fact that I get so mad when people are like, well, why haven't Blacks pulled themselves up by the bootstraps? And it's like, because we don't have any boots, right? You know, and every time we get some boots, y'all burn them or bomb them or shoot them in the night, like while they're sleeping. So I think it's a story of familial love. It's a story about people coming of age in very different ways. I mean, Iris's coming of age is very different from Melody's coming of age. And it's a story about the destruction of Black wealth and family from Tulsa to 9/11. And, you know, there were many other instances in between that I don't reference in the book, but I do want it. I didn't know about the Tulsa Race Massacre till I was in my 20s. And I wanted it on the page. I wanted it put into context and into history.
Yeah. I'm going to make sure that the audience knows that you can drop some questions in the chat, and we will make sure that Jacqueline gets them. Katie too will come back and moderate that part. But while we wait for those questions, is there a question that you've never been asked that you wish people would ask you that you have the perfect answer for?
Oh my goodness, I don't know, Novella. Do you have a question like that?
Do I have a, no, I mean, I don't at the moment, now that I put you on the spot, with you putting me on the spot, interesting. I think Levar really covered it because I'm always interested in what was the seed, right? Like what was the seed that germinated that brought us the Jacqueline Woodson that we know? And I think what I was hearing from your conversation, which I think is true about you in person, is the way that he talked about and the way that you talked about sensitivity. I feel that from you, like you just have a care for people. Yeah. It's not more or less, you know, it just is a care for people.
Yeah.
That's
so sweet. Thank you. I do like people a lot. You know, I think that's why Zoom is hard, right? Because you and I, you know, I love going to the Schomburg. I love being in the space. I love being able to hug people and engage and, you know, see young people. And so this is like,
Right.
So I just really hope it's not this way for a long time to come. But it, you know, I think one question people don't ask me is how I procrastinate. And I got a long list of ways I procrastinate. The other day, my poor daughter, so you know my daughter's at Howard now, but she's at Howard at home. Yes. She's represented for all of y'all. She's at Howard in Brooklyn. And so her room up here, I completely rearranged it. Like, she's like,
Right.
why are you even in my room? I'm like, well, I thought you were gonna be gone, but now you're here, so I should make your room a little nicer here. And then I went for a 4-mile walk, and then I played some basketball, and then I did some other cleaning. I mean, it was a good 4 hours of procrastination. And it was like, you have nothing else you can do right now. So you need to sit your butt down and get some writing done. So, but I find all kinds of ways to procrastinate.
I don't even believe that with someone who is always publishing. I don't even understand that. Jacqueline Woodson.
Thanks, Novella.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Katie, I see, who has a bevy of questions from the audience. So take it away.
Thanks, Novella. I'm glad to be back. Jacqueline, I'm going to need your secret sauce for this procrastination cure, because like Novella said, I don't know if you're telling us the whole story, but
you know, part of it is, I think when I'm procrastinating, my mind is still working, right? Like if I'm sewing, I'm putting pieces together of fabric, but also trying to figure out pieces of a story. So I am stepping away from the physical act of writing, but in my head, stuff is still brewing.
See, that's what I meant by the secret sauce. That's what I meant. All right. We have some really good questions from the audience, and I'm going to jump right into it. This question is from Allie. What art/literature are you enjoying in this painful moment? What is speaking to you? And what are you streaming or binging, if you want to add that too?
That's great. I you know, for the streaming and binging, I May Destroy You. I finished that, Unorthodox. And my son has gotten me hooked on The Office, which I really, really didn't like for a long time. And now I find myself laughing at it and completely escaping. I'm reading a lot of Ida B. Wells right now, because I didn't know her, and I wanna understand how she walked into lynchings and lived, like the things she did to get the word out that Black and brown bodies were being killed for no reason, aside from the fact that they were making a little bit of money, was amazing. I also, this book by Cornelius Eady called Brutal Imagination. And this is probably about my 4th time reading it. And it's a collection of poetry around Susan Smith, who was the white woman, I think in the South some years back, who told the authorities that a Black man had kidnapped her kids. And basically she had driven her kids into the river, into a body of water, and killed them. But she blamed it on a Black man. And so all these Black men ended up getting, you know, tortured and traumatized and arrested. And it's about, it's about the Black man who gets conjured up when you need the bad guy. And it's just brilliant. It's just brilliant. So what else am I reading? I've just finished reading Ocean Vuong's book again, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which is stunning, and a couple of books that I'm reading to blurb. So I usually am reading more than one thing at a time. So yeah, binge and read and just really write. I've been writing so much, and writing, I just kind of put my head down and stay away from social media a little bit to help me kind of clear it of all the stuff going on right now.
Actually, speaking of writing, for our younger audiences, I'm sure they're curious. I didn't grow up writing. I grew up reading a lot, and going to public schools. A lot of teachers would tell you, like, your writing isn't, you know, great, right? You're struggling with grammar, storytelling, and things like that. I'm wondering what you can tell up and coming writers about the writing process that's not so intimidating. What advice would you give them?
So that's a great question. First and foremost, when you share your writing, ask your teacher or ask whoever you're sharing it with, the first time they look at it, to just tell you everything they love about it. You don't want to see any grammar, any corrections on the page. Your teachers should never use red pens, because red pens are angry. Purple is a nice color to write comments on. Your teacher should not write more than 3 comments on your page, because otherwise it gets overwhelming. But first and foremost, everything that they love about it is really important for young writers to hear. And then when they tell you all the stuff they love about it, go back and write a little bit more, right? If you can't think of more to write, just start a new story or have that character in a different place. But my first drafts of things are really fragile and really a mess. So I think grammar is important at some point, but not early on. Early on, it's just about getting that story on the page, getting that poem on the page, getting that comic strip on the page. And once you get it on the page, go back and read something that's been published, right? And just study that writer a little bit. And then also the writing that you've done, everything I write, I read out loud, because it has to sound a certain way. And when I read it out loud, I could hear the mistakes I'm making. I could hear where I want it to be a little longer, where I want it to be a little shorter. So read your writing out loud, not to people. You could read it in your bathroom, you could read it in a whisper if other people are around, but read it out loud so that you can listen to it.
I love that. I mean, you're describing it, you're stressing how much of it is a process and not a perfection. I mean, I'm thinking about when young people start writing, you're right. Like the red marks, the negative comments are so intimidating, especially if we're thinking about people who struggle with literacy. You're already, discouraging them from the start. So I love your advice about just going into a young person's writing or anyone's writing with like this optimism and pointing out what's been going great and what can be improved. So now it makes me think of like young Jacqueline Woodson. What were you writing this much in your preteens, and like what kind of stories were you writing?
It's funny, a friend over Facebook a couple of years ago sent a poem that I had published in my literary magazine. And it was kind of good. I was like, wow, that's kind of good. I wrote that. I had no memory of writing that, even though I was writing a lot as a young person. One thing I did not write, I didn't rhyme, which I thought was interesting. I think a lot of times as a young person, you lean toward rhyme. And maybe because I was not in the period of hip hop, it was just a little before that. I came of age with Sugar Hill, but that was like, by then I was a teenager. But I kind of had the same thing that I'm doing now, which is these short narrative spurts of stories about everything from nature to first love, to a lot of stuff that I wrote as a young person was about unfairness of things. Right? So, and I think that was about having this young kind of eye on the world and being like, wait a minute, from a very young age, like looking at things deeply.
So thinking about, writing from, what young people are struggling with, I'm wondering, in the context of all that's happening around us from COVID, this pandemic, loss in more ways than one, racist violence, racial terror. I'm wondering, a lot of our questions are coming in about how do you remain hopeful, especially in your writing, not to, veer off into like a very pessimistic place, which all of us are capable of being in.
Yeah.
So how do you approach that?
I think of enslavement. I think of the Middle Passage. I think of Ida B. Wells. I think of, the Obamas. I mean, I think of so many times when we've had to be inside a struggle, and going to negative place. I never say dark. I hate when people use dark to describe something negative because I'm dark and I don't think I'm negative. So I try not to go to a negative, oblique place, because what good is that, right? Like, so for me, I'm just happy to have woken up this morning, right? I think that it's the small things. I'm happy to be talking to you. I'm happy that I'm going to get to maybe take a walk later. And I'm happy that I'm able to write. And I think writing is so important. And that's why it's not about spelling, it's not about showing people, but it's about putting those thoughts onto paper as a way of exhaling and say, okay, I was able to write this, so for now I'm okay. I was doing a Zoom with a group of young people who had a reading group, and it was a lot of kids had their own room, and you saw them on their Zooms and they're in their own room. And this one girl was sitting down by the toilet bowl in her bathroom. And that was obviously her only private space in the house. And I thought, I would love to hear that story. Like she is the one that is most interesting to me on the Zoom. Like I would love to hear her story and know what it means to go into that bathroom, close that door, sit down, and here is the place I go. Because it's so specific, right? And so different. And you could tell she was embarrassed about it, but I'm like, wow, you're amazing. Like, this is amazing that you're here, you're focused, you made it. So I do think that really our experiences right now are so specific, even though we have this shared experience of the revolution and the pandemic. But right, I think that those experiences need to be talked about, written down, spoken into voice memos, which is another thing I wish teachers would let young people do more, listen to audiobook and make voice memos as a means of telling their story. Because I do think people get stuck with the writing when thinking about spelling and grammar and all the ways that we end up what's the word? I can't believe I can't think of the word. But anyway, we self-censoring. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, we police writing and say, this is the box that you have to start with. I totally experienced that as an educator, especially at the Junior Scholars. What we try to do is meet everyone where they are and show them multiple ways to tell stories. And it could be in spoken word. It could be through a painting, a sculpture, a piece of clothing, a archival piece that you found. And you're like, this speaks to me. I just don't have the words yet. So I appreciate how you're even like saying, expanding how we think of how we write, record how we're feeling and what we're experiencing. Some folks in the Q&A section want to know if this moment, the pandemic, the Breonna Taylor's decision, George Floyd, all of what's happening right now, especially in 2020, including an election, will they play any role in your future work? I feel like that's kind of answers itself.
We were talking about it's like, 2020 is going to be a verb in no time. Like, right? It's like, oh man, I feel so 2020. I'm just going to go back to bed, or like a verb to describe something that's you just want to get out of your life. 2020 has one-twoed us in so many ways. I don't even know how to make sense of it. But I don't know. I feel like I lived through 9/11. I didn't write about 9/11 until many, many years later. And even Katrina, like the things that were devastating, I really had to take some space from before I could write about them. And in the moment, I would have said, no, I'm not going to write about it. But I'm sure this is going to show up in some shape or form in some part of my literature at some point. But this has been a year for the record. So, and we're here almost in October, so we need to give ourselves a pat on the back.
Yes. I actually wrote down what you said earlier while talking to Novella. You said, I write to learn, I don't write to teach. And I'm quoting you on that when I work with kids. I'm just like, because I'm curious to know what you have learned about yourself through just your career. What is one thing you've learned about yourself?
I think as a kid, I had a lot of shame about my family, about being poor, about, coming from a family with a single mom and an uncle who was incarcerated, because, we were taught that we weren't supposed to talk about that. We were Jehovah's Witnesses, nobody else was, and that was kind of embarrassing. There were so many levels of shame and embarrassment. And what I've learned is that, I'm kind of badass. I'm kind of amazing. And
even kinda, like straight amazing.
My daughter is always like, you're so conceited. It's like, you don't know what kind of work it took to get to this moment of realizing that we have survived and done amazing stuff. And thinking that about that amazingness, and I'm talking about our whole race of people, like just the fact that we came here, we were brought here enslaved, and we weren't meant to survive, and we survived anyway, and we went on to be doctors and lawyers and teachers and presidents and all of this stuff. Like that blows my mind. And I think it took all of these years and writing all of these books and really thinking deeply about all of these experiences to get to this point of going, wow, we're kind of amazing.
Yes.
So that's what I've learned. I don't, and as a result, I feel like I can see other people's experiences with empathy and not with judgment. And I would never look at someone who's underserved and think they're lesser than, or someone who has not finished high school or college and think they're lesser than, or they're less smart than I am, because I've also learned there are all kinds of ways to be intelligent. And it's too often it does not get recognized in the classroom.
Yes.
So much I've learned, and so much of this I've learned through writing, through asking questions, through interrogating it on the page.
Well, I just want to thank you so much, Jacqueline.
Oh.
I've learned so much, and I know our viewers and young people who've interacted with your work, teachers, students, everyone, we've learned so much through your process. So thank you for doing that work for yourself so that we can all bask in it as well.
Thanks, Katie,
I want to close the program by
teaching.
thanking everyone for coming. Our next program is at 2:30, The Black Flamingo with Dean Atta and Emil Wilbekin. Please come back at 2:30. We want to make sure you refresh your screen just so that you get the right program. But thank you again, Jacqueline. We at the Schomburg love you, and we'll welcome you back every single time.
I love y'all, Katie, too. I'm gonna go to the shop and get that shirt. Thanks so much.
You're welcome, and take care. Thank you so much.
You too.